So thank you, Dan. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time out to attend this presentation. This is the third presentation we've run this week on Bimodal and the role of innovation management and enterprise architecture within Bimodal. It's proving very popular, and Bimodal is a term coined by Gartner, and we'll address what that means as we go through the presentation. So I'm Martin Owen. I'm the CEO of Corso. As Dan said, we're going to have plenty of time for questions at the end. So if you've got questions, just please submit them through the panel, and then we'll try and answer as many as we can. And if we don't get back to you on this session, then we'll certainly follow up with email and get back to you. Okay, so just a little bit about who Corso are. We're actually an enterprise architecture and strategic planning software company. So we've been involved in both enterprise architecture and innovation management for some time now. So we started off with a company called Popkin Software back in the 80s, and Popkin Software created a tool called System Architect, which we were responsible for. And then we went through with Popkin Software into a company called Telelogic, who acquired Popkin, which is a Swedish company. And then we started to look at things like requirements management, how that fitted with enterprise architecture. And then from there, that company was also acquired by IBM. And there we were working on what we're calling strategic planning, which is really looking at how do you look at planning activities within the business, and how does enterprise architecture address those, and what other periphery domains fit around enterprise architecture. And innovation management was one of those. So we've been through a lot of change. We've seen a lot happening in the marketplace. As a company, we're also involved in standards bodies. So we work with the Open Group quite heavily around frameworks such as Archimate and TOGAF. And we also work with a lot of the analysts as well. So obviously a prime one there is Gartner. And a lot of the slides you'll see, and a lot of the things we're going to talk about have been influenced heavily by Gartner. So as I mentioned, we are a product company. So we have a SaaS platform. So it's software as a service, and it's a monthly rental model for our products. And again, there's a link at the end of our presentation to come in and try our software out with our trial. We have traditionally been doing lots of hosting of IBM products as well. So we provide software as a service for requirements management and enterprise architecture tools from IBM. We've got offices around the world. So we're headquartered out of the UK, but we have offices in the US, Australia, and Canada. We've got a full professional services team that can support you in enterprise architecture and strategic planning endeavors. And obviously we've got a very strong partner network. So if any of you out there are looking to partner with us, we do have a partnership program that you can come and participate in. Okay, so that's a little bit about Corso. I've been around for about 4.5, 5 years now, so quite mature in this area. And again, we're a growing company, so we're profitable, we've grown year on year. So what is Bimodal? So effectively, Bimodal is really about organizations supporting their traditional business model. So looking at traditional business operations and business services. So effectively keeping the lights going on the existing business, but at the same time, enabling themselves to innovate. So that's taking ideas and innovation into the organization without necessarily disrupting what's going on in the core business. And that requires different skills. It requires different ways of thinking. They're not necessarily exclusive to each other. So some of the techniques we're going to look at in this presentation, when we talk about Bimodal, and we talk about splitting different techniques and different ways of looking at things across traditional and both innovation, you can apply some of those techniques to both traditional and innovation. Okay, so I'll try and put that out as we go through. As we mentioned, Bimodal IT is a phrase coined by Gartner. So it sits alongside other phrases like the Gartner Magic Quadrant, the Gartner Hype Cycle. And it's becoming a very standard way of actually communicating with an organization about both that traditional way of looking at your operations and the innovative way of looking at operations. So it's really about maintaining your mission-critical legacy infrastructure. And what we mean by that is that for many organizations, they are brownfield sites. They're not startups. You're not starting afresh with a fresh set of business processes or organizational structure. You may move locations. You're probably dealing with much the same data. Technology is changing, and you may be looking at different types of applications. But effectively, the way you carry out your core business, certainly when it's mission critical, it remains the same. But what you need to do at the same time is pave the way for innovation. And by that, we mean that you need to start looking at ways of doing innovative things in the marketplace. You need to start looking at new products to market, new ways of delivering services. And there's a number of reasons for that, which we'll come on to later on. So what is bimodal? Is it legacy versus emergent systems? Is it brownfield versus greenfield deployment? Is it sustaining versus disruptive? Is it old versus new? And there's many different ways to look at this. Supporting the current business versus driving new growth. And it could be all of these. And there's many more ways of describing parts of bimodal in the organization. So when we talk about bimodal IT, we talk about two different ways of operating. And again, these are Gartner terms. So when we talk about mode one, we're talking about the traditional way of supporting the business. So in mode one, we're really looking at an emphasis on scalability, reducing risk, efficiency, making sure we've got safety in mind, and very accurate ways of doing our operations as a business. And that gives us the sort of safety and it gives the executives in the organization a feeling of being very secure with how the business is operating. Mode two is really about agility and speed and innovation. Okay, so often non-sequential, looking at things like ad hoc events that come in, or as Gartner terms them, business moments coming into the organization. But being able to deal with those and look at those alongside our mode one operations. So one of the reasons we're interested in looking at it bimodal is that to fully understand bimodal and look at what is mode one and mode two, you really need to start looking at enterprise architecture and innovation management. So both those disciplines together, they're things that we've been involved in certainly for the past 3 or 4 years within Corso. And certainly when we were at IBM, there were key things we were looking at about how to plug those two things together. And it's one of the reasons why we created Corso in the first place. And it's naturally the way that the world's moving. So many IT organizations are looking at innovation as a practice. They're looking at tying innovation into IT. Quite often, if you're running innovation management programs in an organization, they're often being run by the IT teams themselves for supplying infrastructure to support ideation. So mode one is about, and you'll see here in our graphic here, mode one, we've got a jogger, so it's about keeping things moving along, moving at a steady state. Mode two can be seen as more of a sprint, more of a way of doing things more dynamically and more quickly. But we need to do that within the context of managing change. Okay, so this is an interesting chart from Gartner again. So this is a survey within the CIO agenda, and it's from this year. So this is a survey of CIOs around the world about what they saw as their top technology investment priorities for 2015. And what we've done here is we've looked at, on the left-hand side here, you'll see a circle called Mode 1. We call that renovating the core. So this is really about how do you maintain the core infrastructure of the business? How do you renovate it, keep it up to date? On the right-hand side here, we're looking at how do you exploit the new? How do you take advantage of new opportunities and new innovation? And it's not necessarily this black and white, but we've picked out here, if we start to look at some of the investment priorities, things like BI analytics, those are areas where we can innovate, and analytics aren't necessarily part of the core business, but they're certainly an area we can aim at for innovation. Looking at things like your infrastructure and data, that's certainly core technology. Cloud, adopting cloud and software as a service, and then related to that, things like security there at number 7. Again, can be seen as exploiting the new. So are there areas of your business where you can start to look at cloud infrastructure? Is there low risk ways of you deploying into the cloud or taking on SaaS applications. And then on the other side here, things like ERP, so things like SAP, Siebel, Oracle, those types of technologies have been around for a long time now, and they're part of the core business, and they're underpinning a lot of the processes that go inside a business. And obviously mobile's there as well. So what you'll see here is we start to split out and look at those technology investment priorities, and you can see that actually they're influenced by both keeping the lights on, so keeping mode 1 running, and at the same time looking for opportunities in mode 2. And you can see here where the anticipated spend is. It's roughly about a 50-50 split on here. And those priorities are changing all the time. Okay, so what's different in today's world? So why are things different now? So why do we need to start looking at the term bimodal IT? And effectively, it's because we're in an era of change, and where change is very rapid. There's a lot of focus on getting organisations to be able to respond to change in the marketplace or in the environment, in the legislation that's coming out from governments. And we're also in a world where development's changing, IT is changing. So now everybody's now used to the phrase DevOps, looking at tying development to operations, to deployment, automated testing, looking at things like Agile, Lean, Scrum, but also then tying into things like business-driven development, where we're focusing on involving users in our development life cycles. And that's all to do with speed of change, being able to deploy very quickly and be able to react to the market very quickly. So the world's now different, and that doesn't mean necessarily that we have to get rid of some of the terms that we've used in the past. So there's a few examples on here when we start to look at things like traditional waterfall methodologies that have been traditionally used in software development. They tend to start off with things like the V life cycle, where you're looking at requirements, analysis, design, code, testing, deployment, and then moving back up again. Very much in a structured manner, where you start off in a series of steps and then you finish the project, as opposed to Agile, where you're delivering in sprints and stories and epics and different user journeys. And what that means is that you've got different ways of releasing. So if you're following more of an Agile approach, certainly over time you can incrementally deliver faster, potentially at less risk over time. Whereas if you're looking at waterfall methodology, because you're working on certain blocks, then you're tending to release in bigger chunks with bigger peaks and troughs. And therefore your release life cycles over time are fewer and further between. And that sort of fits itself well into dealing with different types of projects and different types of mode 1 and mode 2. Because if you're dealing with mission critical operations and business services and processes and systems and technologies, then waterfall methodologies may well suit you better than Agile. And that's not, let's say you can't use Agile on a mission critical project, you certainly can, but it does mean that you may find that waterfall is more suited to that. Whereas if you look at some of the innovation and things where you're trying to get to market very quickly, then you may find that Agile is much more suited to what you're trying to achieve. So, yeah, the world's changed. Now, what are the implications of moving to bimodal? We certainly have different goals. So in mode 1, a goal of IT is to be more reliable. So we want very reliable IT for mission critical systems. We're keeping the lights to the business on. We're keeping it going. We really want our very, very reliable processes, organizational structure, people, technology. With mode 2, we're really looking at agility. Can we do things quicker, faster, again, faster time to market? The value for mode 1 is there's a price for performance, certainly. And the value in mode 2 is we're getting quick revenue, we're getting a good customer experience because we're linked very closely to the customer, and things like brand and marketing are very, very valued. When you look at mode 1, Waterfall and the V model are very well suited to mode 1, as is Agile and Kanban to mode 2. And again, that's not necessarily saying that we can't do mission critical or mode 1 support, with Agile and Kanban, you certainly can. And vice versa, with mode 2, you could do Waterfall support in innovation. But you have to be very clear on what you're delivering. When we talk about governance, then in mode 1, we're looking at plan-driven. So we look at very much at building blocks of plans, and plans get taken to the next level. They get signed off between different phases. As opposed to mode 2, where we're looking at continuous, empirical, process-based, and a collaborative approach, where people join in and agree and prototype and work things out together. When we get to sourcing, the implication of sourcing, certainly in mode 1, is you're looking for enterprise-level suppliers. And you're looking for long-term contracts with those suppliers. So it's more of a partnership. When we're looking at mode 2, you can start to look at things like short-term deals, software as a service, innovative vendors that are bringing something different to the market because they're unique, and often they can be small. And then when we look at talent, we're looking at conventional projects and process skills in mode 1. And in mode 2, the types of talent we need to look at, the types of skills and competencies, are what people can do with uncertainty, innovation, and being able to prototype and throw things away. And it tends to be the culture within mode 1, very IT-centric, a little bit removed from the customer, whereas in mode 2, it tends to be very business-centric and you're very close to the customer. And again, because of these peaks and troughs, and because you're getting things to market quickly, you have to make sure that what you're building is what the customer wants. And again, because of that time duration, you're really looking at long cycle times for mode 1, as opposed to much shorter times for mode 2. This isn't a comparison, so we're not saying mode 1 is better than mode 2, but we're just saying there are very different types of approaches to help you to support mission critical systems, as opposed to mode 2, which is really looking at innovation and bringing innovation directly into the organization. Okay, so what we're doing here is I've been talking about mode 1 and mode 2. We're really decoupling mode 1 and mode 2 from the core business. And often, legacy systems are often responsible for an organization's most critical processes. So again, certainly if you're a brownfield organization, then you're going to have many legacy systems in there that support your core data. It's very difficult for you to change them. They're managing the fundamental data of the business. And often these have been built over time. They're very much valued for how reliable they are, their availability to the organization, serviceability, you know how to maintain them, and they're secure. And it's very difficult to look at innovation around those legacy systems. It's not impossible, but it is more difficult than looking at low-hanging fruits around mode 2 environments. It's often difficult as well to start to introduce cloud services. So people are very worried about, organizations are very worried about storing their fundamental data outside of their firewall, for example. They're very worried about looking at putting their intellectual property outside of the firewall into other vendors. So there's a good reason to decouple mode 1 and mode 2 so we can start to identify what things we need to do to achieve innovation. So why is enterprise architecture very beneficial? So it gives us a great way to identify mode 1 and mode 2 assets. So if we think about enterprise architecture being the blueprint of the organization, we can start to look at things such as, what are the core business capabilities we've got as an organization? What are the business processes we're operating upon? What organizational structures have we got, and what roles and people are required? We can look at locations. So where are we actually deployed? Where are those business processes, capabilities, people, systems being deployed? We can look at data. What's our core data? What are our core applications and systems? And what's our core technology? And within that, we then start to say, okay, which are our most important processes? Which ones are supporting critical systems? And which critical systems are supporting critical processes? Which people are critical? We can start doing lots of identification of what's mode 1 and mode 2 using enterprise architecture. It helps us to improve communication through the organization, because certainly if we now know that things are critical to the business, they're mission critical, they're mode 1, we can start to deal with them slightly differently than those mode 2 assets and start to have more of a conversation about them. We can also start to build more accurate and reliable plans and roadmaps because we're looking at mode 1 and mode 2 assets within enterprise architecture. So it might be that because we've got something that's very reliable, it's core and fundamental to the business, then maybe we can't change it as much as we'd like to change it. That's certainly going to affect the way that we build our roadmaps going forward to achieve innovation. We also need to understand the impact of change and identify a real cost. So although it may not be apparent up front that something in mode 2, which we think is very innovative, maybe up front it doesn't appear that it's affecting a business critical process. Maybe when we start to look at the enterprise architecture, we actually see in fact it does touch upon that process and therefore changes both the cost and the impact of change is a lot more difficult than we thought. And that obviously gives us the ability to have better project success and reliability. We're also looking at standardizing those business and IT assets. So if we need to replace part of the core or mode 1, we know exactly what effect it has on the business. And it also gives us the ability to trace objectives from the business right through down into mode 1 and mode 2 assets for better visibility. So if we've got, for example, a directive from, let's say, the CEO in the organization to be more innovative and to achieve an extra 20% revenue in sales for next year, then maybe we can start to look at all of the processes that affects, the people it affects, the systems it affects. And if they're mode 1, we can maybe push back a little bit on some of those objectives. If they're mode 2, or primarily mode 2, we can start to see how we can achieve those objectives. So lots of reasons why putting an enterprise architecture in the organization is beneficial, and why, if you've got an existing enterprise architecture practice, why starting to identify mode 1 and mode 2 assets makes a lot of sense. So one of the steps that you need to do to decouple enterprise architecture assets. Okay, so and you notice on here we've got a tortoise and a hare being shown here. So effectively what we're showing here is that if we look at the tortoise as mode 1, it's got a very straight path, it goes very slowly, but it's very focused and certain on where it's going. The hare can go all over the place, it jumps about, and it fits mode 2 very well. So the first thing we can do here is we can start to look at what are the mode 1 dependencies. So we can use the traditional enterprise architecture environment. It doesn't matter if you're using Archimate or TOGAF or maybe a defense or federal framework like MODAF or DODAF. But what we need to look at is what are the characteristics in our organization that define mode 1 assets. And again, we'll have a look at some examples of that in the next few slides. The next thing to do is to look at what are the mode 2 candidates. So what areas of the architecture do we need to identify where IT and the business has less to lose? So where are the less dependencies on critical systems and processes? And it might be that you start to find out quite quickly that you can look at things like software as a service or iterative development or cloud services and other potential areas where mode 2 candidates make sense. We can start to look at what are the large potential gains in those mode 2 candidates and start to pick them off quite quickly. And the third thing on here we can do is start to look at an innovation management process. So if you haven't started to look at innovation management yet, you certainly should be doing. And it's really the way that enterprise architecture is extending. So innovation management is really about looking at what opportunities, what demand have you got coming into the organization, what ideas have people got, and how are you going to implement those in your enterprise. And you use both innovation management coupled with enterprise architecture to do that. And again, I'll take you through some processes of how that can be achieved shortly. One of the things you need to do in the innovation management process is set your scorecard criteria. So what things make ideas and requirements and demand, what types of things make them useful to your organization? So what score, what metrics would you start to measure about an idea? And again, I'll give you some examples of those as we go through. So let's have a look at the step 1, which is defining mode 1 dependencies. So we need to start looking at what are the key systems, key processes, what effect do they have on each other, which locations are impacted, which organizations and roles are responsible for those systems, which data gets affected. Is there any technology required to make sure that we're moving along with mode 1? And also, is there any legacy technology that's likely to be affected by vendors, those types of things? And obviously, which business capabilities are affected? But this, again, if you've been doing enterprise architecture for a while, these aren't new questions. So these are old questions, or existing questions, that can help you answer within the context of mode 1. What is a mode 1 dependency? So some examples of mode 1 attributes. So we can look at any aspect of the architecture, and we can start to say, what are the attributes? What are the attributes to my organization that are important? And it might be that something's got high business criticality. It might have high IT alignment, so it's highly reliant on IT. And you might have some other types of attributes. An example here is all business processes have high criticality, and all applications that support critical business processes might make an asset in my architecture a mode 1 asset. So for many of our customers, coming up with those attributes is something that's quite often personal to the business, but you need to start looking at what makes parts of my architecture mission critical, which things am I unlikely to want to change over time, which things make it a tortoise rather than a hare. So we can look at this in terms of a visualization. So this is a visualization from Archimate. And Archimate is the open group, or one of the open group standards for enterprise architecture. It's got a very strong visual notation. And what you can see in here is that we're identifying here, and this is using our own web-based Archimate solution. So it's Corso Agile EA. And this is saying that we've got in the middle of the screen here a red flag next to accept claim. And that's because it's marked as having high business criticality. And it's also connected to the box at the top there, which is like a blue box, which is an application called claim data management. That is also tagged as having high criticality. So the fact that business process is connected to a highly critical application and the business process is highly critical to the business makes it a mode 1 candidate. And that's just an example here of the types of criteria you can put on for identification of mode 1 assets. Okay, so when we start to identify mode 2 candidates, here's an example. So we can start to look at things like, is it low, medium risk? So it might be that as we've been defining the architecture, we can start to look at processes, applications, locations, data, exactly. Anything in our architecture as having a risk profile and an organizational value. And again, it doesn't matter if you're dealing with maybe locations. So it could be a location is low risk. So closing down an office or closing down an environment has very little impact on the business, whereas closing down a data center probably does. And in the middle of the screen here, you will also see some attributes. So again, these are just sample attributes from some of our customers. So you can see here we've got business criticality, functional quality, technical quality, what's the risk profile, health status. And again, you've probably got more in your organization that help you identify whether assets are mode 1 or mode 2. So what we're not saying here is that you have to have 2 separate architectures. So you don't have to, you're not doing much more work here. So you're not building an enterprise architecture for mode 1 and then a separate enterprise architecture for mode 2. You're using the same underlying architecture to identify mode 1 and mode 2 assets, both through their associations. So does a process link to a critical business system? And is that process important to the business? That's a nice way of measuring mode 1. And here we're looking at, is it low risk? And it doesn't connect, for example, to a critical business system. That could be another way of identifying mode 2. But it's using the same information with different attributes and different types of connections. So a same view of the model here, but this time we're now looking at, in the top right-hand corner here, we've put an orange tag on here for mode 2. So this application here doesn't have, it's low risk to the business. It's not dependent on any critical processes, and it's not connected to any other applications that are critical either. So it's identified as mode 2. So that's potentially a candidate for us to take away, to look at, to innovate around, maybe replace, maybe looking at external software as a service solutions to replace that home and away financial application. So this is an insurance system we're looking at here. And again, as I mentioned before, it's the Archimate standard notation, and it's using the sample from the Archimate forum on the open group. Okay, and again, using the same view here, I could switch on mode 1 and mode 2. So now I can look at, you know, what are the mission critical applications and processes, and what are the mode 2, what's identified as mode 2. And I can actually visually see now that actually they're not dependent on each other. Although paid claim, the process in the middle there, has a dependency on the critical or mode 1 application for claim data management, but it also is supported through a home and away financial application. And again, you have to look at these in their own right. So we can go away and do some analysis on this and see if we're looking at mode 2 and innovation around mode 2, what does that mean? What's the impact? Another way of looking at this type of stuff, and again, if you're looking at, if you're using software tools, many tools, some tools have this view. Sometimes called an impact diagram or an explorer diagram. So here we're showing the impact in the middle here of the home and away financial application, which is mode 2, and its impact on the mode 1 artifacts. Now, in the previous diagram, I was just looking at a view for the diagram of a claims, insurance claim system. So that wasn't a total view of the model. So an impact diagram here would also tell me, apart from that view, do I have any other dependencies on maybe mode 1 and mode 2? I can see here I do. So maybe I really need to look at home and away financial application and its connection to claim data management, and what that means. So again, the enterprise architecture is fundamental in helping you establish what's mode 1, what's mode 2. Can I change things? Can I target them? So once we've been through identifying the metrics for mode 1, or attributes for mode 1, the metrics or attributes of mode 2, I can also start to look at innovation management process. So for those of you that haven't seen an innovation management process before, this is one we put together. Again, it's used by quite a few of our customers, and it's very, very similar to a sales and marketing pipeline. So what you're doing here is you're collecting lots of information up front, at the front of the funnel, and you're moving it through to a few ideas that you want to execute and carry out and focus on. Now, right up front here, before we get to the start of the funnel, we're looking at what we call innovation challenges or campaigns. So what are the campaigns you want to run as an organization that help you identify things like ideas to focus on? And quite often, we'll tie things like objectives and business goals. So again, from an enterprise architecture perspective, then you can start to use things like TOGAF and Archimate with their motivation views, or things like the business motivation model from the OMG. And you start to look at those types of models and start to look at the objectives, the goals, the tactics. What are the types of things your organization is trying to drive forward? And then tie those into innovation challenges. So it might be, again, if we take the example that we're trying to increase the revenue in the organization next year by 25%, that is a goal or an objective of the business. And we might want to tie that to an innovation management campaign that says, asks people for ideas for how we're going to increase revenue by 25%. And it might be that we've got then criteria that we want to define, or metrics we want to define around those ideas. So it's those ideas that give us an increase in revenue. It's those ideas that have high IT alignment. It's those ideas that come from executives that we might give a higher ranking to. So those types of things we can start to define as our criteria up front before we start to launch campaigns or start to capture ideas. And then we can run that campaign, like you run a marketing campaign. We can run it within our software. We can launch it to everybody in the organisation, or define user communities in the organisation and start to capture ideas and metrics about that campaign. We can go through discussions and discussion threads around the ideas. People add further ideas and elaborate on those ideas. Then we can rank and review and rate the ideas. So we come up with a smaller set, all the time reducing those ideas to the ideas that are valuable. We can go through a crowd rating, invite different experts into that idea to comment on them, to get feedback about them. Shortlist them, provide business cases, get them approved, and then maybe execute some pilots, proof of concepts, and implement them. Now, that innovation management process could be used on its own, but what do you do with the ideas once you've got them? And how do you focus? How do you know what to focus on up front? So we made this step 3 here because really you want to start looking at maybe some mode 1 things you want to identify for long-term change, and maybe some mode 2 things you want to identify for some rapid change, and then tie those through to the goals and objectives. Okay, so they go hand in hand together with enterprise architecture and innovation management. And here's an example criteria that you can use for ideation, for example. So here we're looking at what's the purpose of the idea. This one's to reduce costs. It's got a classification of cost savings over here. This one's got poor IT alignment. We haven't set the value for it. It's got a high business impact. It's coming from an employee. It could be a customer, a partner, a vendor, for example. It's got a value, etc. So these are the criteria we can use for moving things down the funnel. Okay, so for those people that have been on previous webinars with us before, you may have seen this diagram. This is our enterprise architecture view of the world. And what you'll see happening here is that in the middle, the large orange box is effectively your strategic planning practice. And what you're doing here in the middle is you're defining your enterprise architecture. So your enterprise architecture helps you do 2 things. One is do the right things. So it helps you to provide information for prioritization of what you need to get done. It helps you to do things right. So it provides governance. And it provides you a way of managing your workload. On the left-hand side here, we've got the vision, the strategy, the goals, the objectives. So that, again, is from a business motivation model we discussed a moment ago. So you're really looking to tie and some people tie in the business motivation model directly to the enterprise architecture. So you could argue that is one big box. But for now, we've just separated it out because it's important enough, certainly when you're doing innovation management and EA together, that having them separate is very important. So we're identifying the goals, the objectives, the strategy. Those are driving the enterprise architecture. They're also influencing the way that we do our project prioritization and planning. And those are then feeding the programs of work we've got on the right-hand side here, the projects that we'll be carrying out. And what we're effectively doing there is we're delivering work packages. I'll go into a more detailed view in a second. Now, right at the top here, we've got ideation going on. So what are the initiatives? What's the demand that's coming in? What's the innovation that we're driving out? So is it changes in legislation? Is it new ideas from employees? Is it a campaign we're running to do a certain thing? And those campaigns are a filtered set of ideas and initiatives for our innovation management campaign that we're then applying to our enterprise architecture. And they're very heavily influenced there from the vision, the strategy, and the goals. Okay. So a more detailed view of that. We'll see the enterprise architecture here has the governance process within it, which is checking that our target architecture is still right, so still doing what's required from an architectural perspective. And we're doing transition planning, how do we get from where we are today to where we want to get to tomorrow. So none of the things change in terms of enterprise architecture. So you've still got current state and future state. You're still doing transition planning. You're still prioritizing your projects. You're still producing work packages. And you'll see at the bottom here, we've got DevOps that you could be doing, Agile or Waterfall here, and handing over your work packages into your operations and then feeding those back into strategic delivery. But what you can then do is start to look at traceability between the two. So the work packages that you're implementing, the projects that you've got on the go, how are those derived from different ideas? How are those derived from different campaigns? So in a more mature organization, in a very mature organization, you can start to look at innovation management, which is affected by mode 2 and mode 1, and what you're delivering as an organization from IT, and starting to measure and quantify them. So which are the most successful campaigns in terms of cost saving, or IT delivery, or getting to market very quickly. So I mentioned goals and campaign. I mentioned those quite a bit, because they are vitally important. So we need to understand in terms of ideation, what are the campaigns we should start with? And quite often it's a good idea to start looking at the low-hanging fruits. So those things that are identified as mode 2 assets. And so they might be low risk, or whatever other criteria you want to use. They don't have heavy dependencies on mode 1 assets. You can match them to the CIO or CXO imperatives and goals. So things like you look at the business capability map or a motivation model. And here's an example here where we're looking at a high level, using our architecture, we're looking at a business capability map showing the capabilities of the business and showing automatically where they've got mode 1 and mode 2 dependencies. And here, if we look at this motivation model here, I can also see here where we've got things like business goals, which is in the bottom left-hand corner here, revised claim handling process. I can see this business goal is impacted by some mode 2 information. So again, this is a target for me now, because underlying this motivation model, this is connected to the rest of the architecture. So it's connected to the systems, the locations, the processes, the data, technology, etc. So very easily, I can run a little analytic on here that just colors in revised claim handling process based upon my attributes and my criteria for identifying mode 2. This then becomes a candidate now for running an innovation management campaign. So here's an example campaign. And what you'll see here is that, again, this is used in our tool. So what we're showing here is that we're going to run a campaign here at the top called Ideas to Improve Claims Handling. That's the campaign name. It's an open-ended campaign. What we mean by that is you could run a campaign for a time duration. So if you know you've only got 2 quarters to improve claims handling, you can maybe run the campaign for a quarter, collect ideas, and start to kick off some work around that. Down here, you can see here, we've got the goal, revised claim handling process. So what this means here is that you're tying innovation via things like the motivation model directly into the architecture. And that reflects back into the diagram we showed right at the beginning, where we've got the funnel, we've got all the ideas coming in. This is the collector of all the ideas in the funnel, influenced by an objective called revised claims handling process, which we identified as having mode 2 connected assets, hence the flag that was on it. And when you're in a campaign like this, anybody in the organization can enter ideas. They can contribute ideas and requirements. They can vote and rank. And then you start to filter through which are the most important ideas. And you can put your metrics on this and scorecards as well. So you can start to automatically work out which are the things to focus on and concentrate on. Further down the line, once you're running ideation with enterprise architecture, again, mode 1, mode 2, we can start to look at mode 1 and mode 2 again. So now I can see here, the light bulbs that you're seeing here, the purple light bulbs are ideas. So these have come from the campaign. You can see the goal revised claim handling process. And that's actually affected by the box in the middle here, which is called all claims should be submitted online. That's actually a requirement. Okay, so we've got a requirement we collected saying that all claims should be submitted online. It's affecting the revised claim handling process objective. We've got an idea here called automatically paid claims less than $1,000. And there'll be some information behind why somebody thinks that's a good idea. And that's linked to this requirement. What we can also see is that this requirement, let's go back again, is influenced by this application component. And the application component here is marked as a mode 1 asset. So we're not stopping, we're not using our enterprise architecture to identify which campaigns in innovation management to target. We're also using it to look at the impact of any ideas further down the process in our architecture. We're tying the ideas right into the architecture and showing the impacts. So it may be that we can't actually implement some of these ideas because they're very tightly aligned with some of our mode 1 business critical systems, which we know we can't replace for the next 3 years. And typically, you may look at a roadmap of that application and say, look, what's the effect? Can I take that out? This is a great idea. It's going to save us a lot of money. Can I take that application components out? It's mode 2, that's mode 1. I need to really go and look at its costing, look at its life cycles. When should I retire it? What's its vendor end date? That type of thing. Okay, so hopefully during the presentation now, I've shown you really that a strategic planning life cycle supports out of the box, without much work apart from you identifying the characteristics and attributes of your architecture, a bimodal approach. You're using your traditional enterprise architecture, and it doesn't matter again whether you're using Archimate, TOGAF, or any other framework to identify mode 1 dependencies. You need to look at what characteristics make things mode 1 assets for you. And then is everything else a mode 2 asset, or do you need to define particular characteristics about mode 2? And then you need to use your innovation management to look at opportunities for mode 2. So using your enterprise architecture, you can start to look at mode 2 assets and start to look at which are the things that are prime for running campaigns and ideation around. And this will help you innovate very quickly in a mode 2 environment. Okay, so that's the presentation. I'm going to open it up now. The next steps are, if you want to try our tool, it's automatic. You can actually just click online here, fill in a form, and you can start using the tool straight away. I'm going to open up the floor now for some questions through Dan.